Latimer City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
Works in the thing, and he wasn't there, and talked to him, and then it emerged coincidentally that the business is closed on Wednesdays, right, today, because often I have trouble getting business people to give talks on Wednesdays and stuff. So fortunate that was all meant to be. And now, is there anybody here who doesn't like chocolate? Yeah, no, we would have to ask you to leave. But of course, the second talk is also going to be fascinating because I'm personally interested in the cruise around Asia, whether it's worth doing and where it goes, etc. I'm very interested in that. But meanwhile, one of my favourite subjects in the world, chocolate, and Thomas Householder about his journey with chocolate.
This way, yeah. Okay. All right, everybody hear me? Good, good. Hey, before I get started, first I have to thank Ren and Brad for helping with the technical aspect of everything. Okay. Thanks to Ren and the Expat Club for inviting me today, and thank all of you for coming out and giving me this opportunity to explain a little bit about myself and hopefully a little bit more about chocolate. If I keep dropping the mic, tell me, because I'm not used to holding it that close to the thing, but hopefully you all can hear okay. But hopefully you'll get something out of today's presentation. I know everybody likes chocolate, but basically it's a little hodgepodge of some of the stuff that I do, and just give you an overall idea of what a chocolatier kind of goes through, okay? Small technical difficulty. Yeah.
So this is forward now, and that's backwards.
Okay, we got it all figured out. Thank you for your patience. As Rin said, I'm the owner and chocolatier of Mitchell's Artisan Chocolates, and we just opened up about a year ago. We're located right over there by the Windmill Hotel Resort. They got like a little plaza there. We kind of sit back in the back. And we specialize in kind of making like little chocolate bonbons with different flavors and fillings and all that stuff. We make Nama chocolates, we make truffles, and basically anything else I can think of that we try to come up with new products all the time. So that's kind of what we do. It's just a small business, a very small shop. I make everything right there in the back. If you don't know it, selling chocolate in Thailand has a lot of obstacles. We talk about the weather, the working conditions, the location, and all that stuff. So to say that it hasn't been a challenge would be an understatement. So there's definitely a lot of obstacles. But I just wanted to provide something a little bit different and share my passion for making chocolates. And as a family, hopefully we can make it work and make it a success. But we'll see how it goes. But things like this kind of gets our name out there and kind of helps us a little bit. Okay, so before we get started about chocolate, just a little bit more about myself. I come from the U.S. Anybody from the U.S.? Wow, a lot more than I expected. All right, I come from Akron, Ohio. Anybody from Akron, Ohio? Akron, Ohio. Columbus, okay, close enough. Well, you know, Akron used to be, were you from? Steubenville, okay. I used to have a history teacher from Steubenville. But Akron used to be called the rubber capital of the world. We had Goodrich, Goodyear, Firestone, all those places. But now it's more commonly known as the home of LeBron James, if you know LeBron James. All right, so rubber capital no longer. Okay, yeah. I think you got a different meaning though. But anyways, while I was living in Ohio, at the age of 26, I wasn't happy with the path that my life was taking. So I decided I needed to make a major change in my life. And what I did was I went and seen the Army recruiter. So I said, hey, I need to make a drastic change. I need some discipline. I need something, right? And he said, sure, we can help you with that. So I said, okay. Sign me up for about 4 years. So I figured I'd try that and see how that went. Well, in 2017, after 27 years of service, I retired from the military as a first sergeant from the U.S. Army. But while I was in the Army, in 2012, the Army, I was on a tour in Afghanistan for 1 year. And the Army was very kind, and they said, we're going to give you 2 weeks of free leave, and we'll pay for your plane ticket anywhere in the world you want to go. I said, well, I'll take that. But I only had one problem. See, when you deploy in the Army, you take all your gear, and you only take one set of civilian clothes. And that's for emergency purposes, because I don't want you running around the airport in a uniform in a foreign country. So I knew I needed to go somewhere hot, and I needed to go somewhere cheap, because I got to buy some clothes. So in April of 2012, I found myself at the Flipper House Hotel on Soy 7. And that was my R&R from Afghanistan, my first trip to Thailand. But after those first 2 weeks, excuse me, let me get a drink here. After those first 2 weeks, and I had to go back, I said to myself, this is the place I want to retire. So I went back, had about 5 more years left. Well, actually, I thought I had more, but they actually kicked me out of the Army. They said, you've got 27 years in, and you're not promotable to E9. It's what they call your retention control point. And if you're not promotable to the next grade, they changed it. It used to be 29, then they changed it to 27. So it was kind of a little surprise. I planned on going to 29. But anyway, in 2017, I retired, went home to Ohio for a couple months, came back to Thailand, just like I had planned, and I moved to Bangkok. Bangkok, I went to Stanford International University. Anybody hear that? Stanford? Okay. Anyway, I went there for almost 4 years with COVID and everything else going on, where I graduated with a bachelor's degree in international hotel management. Now, keep in mind, I never had any intention of working at any hotel. I only went there because I had the GI Bill, which paid for my schooling, but more importantly, they gave me a housing allowance. So with that housing allowance, it was kind of like a job for me. So I reaped all my benefits from the Army that I could possibly get. And then that was it. So it was kind of during that time when I started dabbling in chocolate a little bit. But the main thing is that I couldn't find a Reese's cup in Thailand. So I wanted to make my own. For those of you who don't know what a Reese's cup is, basically just a chocolate peanut butter cup. But, you know, it's Reese's. That's what I grew up with. Now, later I found out through my stepdaughter that you can order them through Lazada and get a small bag, but they're probably more expensive than my chocolates. So that's why I kind of got started. But the thing is once you go down that little chocolate rabbit hole, then you start learning more all kinds of different stuff, right? And what drew me into making chocolate was the science behind some of the stuff, okay? Not just making the chocolates, but the science and how it works. And you'll learn what I'm talking about as we go through the process. I know he already asked you, so I'm assuming everybody here is a chocolate lover, right? So today's talk, we're talking about the secrets of superb chocolates, at least in my opinion, okay? But before we get started, you have to remember two things. There's basically two types of people that work with chocolate. You have chocolate makers and you have chocolatiers. Okay, chocolate makers take the beans and they make chocolate. Chocolatiers take somebody else's chocolate, or they could be their own chocolate, but most times not. And they take that chocolate and make chocolates, or bonbons, or pralines. Depends on where you come from, what you call it. Okay, so I wouldn't be able to tell you all the secrets if I didn't talk about both. So let's talk about the process of making chocolate first, and then we'll get to the part that I do. If you ask a lot of people, you say, where does chocolate come from? Some people will say Mars, Hershey, Calavo. But really it comes from a tree. Chocolate grows on a tree. Does everybody know that? Okay. You know, when I was younger, I used to ask my dad for money all the time to do something. And he used to tell me, money don't grow on trees, boy. But if we lived back in the Aztec days, he would have had to change his sentence because the Aztecs actually used cocoa beans for currency. But unfortunately, I didn't live on a cocoa farm. So anyway, starting with the plantation, okay? As I said, cocoa beans, they come from a tree. But how many wine drinkers we got out there? Okay. How many winos? Okay. No hands? No hands. Okay. Anyway, you'll find that as we talk about chocolate, that it's a little bit similar to the wine-making process in certain areas. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we go along. But the first thing that's taking place is the plantation itself. If you notice when you go to buy a fine chocolate bar somewhere, it may say something like single origin or single plantation. They're putting all kinds of information on there. And that's kind of to identify it as a specific region. It's kind of like, you know, having champagne from Champagne, stuff like that. So what I'm saying is, depending on where that tree is grown, what I think they call it the terroir, the natural environment of the earth, it plays a role on the outcome of your product of that bean. So that's very important. And the other big thing is that a lot of these plantations are actually owned by indigenous families of those areas and not by the big companies. The big companies assist these farmers. They help them make their operations more efficient, and now they're making sure they get a fair wage. There's no slave labor involved, but most importantly, make sure that it's sustainable. So that's kind of important. Now the cacao tree, which is actually called Theobroma, means food of the gods, because they used to drink this stuff back in the day. They never had a chocolate bar. They would actually drink it. So that's kind of what I guess the elite people did, and eventually it made its way around the world in candy bars and Reese cups. But it grows on a tree. And on that tree you have the cacao pod. Okay? There's three main types of pods. They call it the Cirillo, the Forastero, and the Trinitario. The Criollo pod is what they call the prince of chocolate. But the problem is that it's very prone to disease, it's hard to grow, so people don't mess with it too much, and if you do find it, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. The Forastero is about 70% of the cocoa pods that they grow, which is the most common. And it's definitely disease resistant, easier to grow, and more profitable for the farmers. Now, the Trinitario, which was developed in Trinidad, is a combination between the two, Criollo and the Forastero. So, as you can see, they got different colors, different shapes, different sizes. But basically, it all depends on where it comes from. There's all kinds of other varieties, that hybrids and stuff like that. So, but those are the three main. Now, inside that cacao pod, if you look up on the right-hand side, you have the pulp and the seeds. Now, this cacao pod just grows from like the stem of the tree, and it's all hand cut, no machinery. They cut them off the tree so they don't damage the trees for the other pods. They flower all year round, and then they usually cut these pods open with a machete. And then they crack the beans open, put them in a pile, and then take them to the next step, which I'll talk about in a minute. Each pod contains anywhere from 20 to 40 seeds. All depends on the variety and where it grows and all that stuff. So once they've harvested the seeds, like in wine, these seeds, the cocoa bean, go through the fermentation process. They take that white pulp and seeds and they put them in a box, very simple box, and then they cover them with banana leaves. And usually from anywhere from 2 to 8 days, the fermentation process takes place. And what happens is it kind of creates the alcohol, and that white pulp and everything disintegrates, and you're left with the bean. And it's at this point that fermentation process that kind of sets the precursors for the chocolate flavor that you'll get later on. And we'll talk about that shortly as well. Once it's fermented, it goes to the drying process. Very simple process. Most of the time, just basically out in the sun, the natural sunlight. Some places have tried to kind of like wood-burning stoves and stuff like that to dry it, but a lot of people don't like that because of the flavor that it creates and stuff like that, so preferably it's air-dried. And then they have, like, if it rains, they have big trolleys that they can slide over top of them to protect them from getting wet. Because what they want to do is they want to get that bean dry to only about 7 or 8% moisture. And once they get that 7, 8% they can pack them safely without worrying about mildew and all the other stuff that goes with moisture. And then they can ship them to wherever they go on the global market. Chocolate factories, chocolate makers, craft makers, anybody who wants to buy their beans. Okay? So now they're shipped. That's all done on the plantation. Now it goes through the process that the chocolate maker, the manufacturer, is going to do. And just like in coffee, they take the coffee beans and they roast them, right? They have to roast the cacao bean. And that's the second precursor that helps develop that chocolate flavor that you're used to, along with the fermentation that happened earlier. Okay? Just as, like I said, coffee is roasting, depending on how long you roast it and how you roast it, will help you develop certain characteristics of that chocolate. And that's like everybody's secrets, you know. How do you roast your beans and how do you do this? And, you know, that's just something that you have to do. Once it's roasted, it goes through what's called the winnowing process, where they take the bean, they put it through a machine, it cracks it, and then it goes through like an air tunnel, and then the air blows the husk off, and then the solid meat of the bean falls down because it's a lot heavier. Okay? That solid meat we call the cocoa nibs. Okay? That's the meat of the cocoa bean. That's what we want. Now that cocoa nib is about 50% cocoa butter, 50% cocoa mass or non-fat solids, if you will. Okay, the brown stuff. Okay? But you wouldn't think of it, but it has a lot of cocoa butter in it, 50 to 55%. Okay? So, what they do is they take these cocoa nibs, and then it goes to the next step of grinding. Okay? This photo up here on the left of the grinding shows you just like a little melanger, right? It just grinds the stuff. But you might find that with like a regular craft chocolatier. But the big companies have what they call like a ball mill. And the ball mill just smashes all that stuff, separates the oil from the non-fat, and then what you end up with is a cocoa liquor. We call it cocoa liquor, but there's no alcohol involved. All right, so don't worry about that. But now that this cocoa liquor is formed, they got it to the micron size that they want, because about 20 to 25 microns on your mouth, you can't feel it. Anything more than that, then you might get like a gritty flavor. Okay, so they kind of measure all that stuff with sophisticated and non-sophisticated equipment and see how it is. But once they have this liquor, remember this is only the cocoa bean, which is 50% butter, and the non-fat cocoa solids. But we have to make chocolate with that, right? So what do we do to make chocolate? Well, we add other ingredients. And then it goes through the conching process, which is basically the same as the grinding process, but it refines the chocolate more and also adds those ingredients depending on what type of chocolate you want to create. And actually some chocolatiers combine all these in one. If you're like a home chocolatier, you just do everything at one time. But the bigger factories, they got a little bit. And then this conching process, not only does it refine it, as it mixes all this stuff, it gets rid of some of those acidic aromas and stuff like that that you don't want in your chocolate. So it does several things. Not sophisticatedly, it just happens. Okay? So, now that the conching is complete, we end up with three main types of chocolate. White, milk, and dark. Okay? Someone out here was just talking to me earlier, and I was going to bring this up anyway. How many people think that white chocolate is not chocolate? Are you all from the UK? Because he said I think it was the UK? If you were in the UK, you'd get beaten with a stick if you call white chocolate chocolate. All right, I'm not going to sit here and debate whether you call it chocolate or not chocolate, but explain to you why they do call it chocolate. And that's for the simple reason that white chocolate contains cocoa butter. That is part of the cocoa bean. Okay? It doesn't have any of those non-fat solids, but it's part of the bean. So it's chocolate. Well, they say it's chocolate. I'm not telling you either way. You make your own opinion. All right? But basically, white chocolate, all it is cocoa butter, sugar, and milk powder. And it can be anything else that they decide to add in, vanilla or secret spices or whatever. And then most of these chocolates all have like a emulsifier added into it, like soy lecithin that helps it bind together and all that stuff a little better. Milk chocolate is like white chocolate, except now it has the cocoa solids. Okay? One little ingredient makes a big difference. Has the same thing, sugar and milk powder. Dark chocolate only has that cocoa liquor, which is 50% cocoa butter, 50% non-fat cocoa solids, and sugar. How many people like dark chocolate compared to milk chocolate? seems like a majority of people like dark chocolate. Dark chocolate supposedly has a lot of antioxidants that are good for you. But we'll talk about that more a little bit later. So these are kind of the 3 most common chocolates you're going to find, right? Now, there's been some innovation in chocolates where we have caramel chocolate. It's actually caramelized white chocolate. Okay, and depending on what company you buy from, like Calabo is called gold. Other companies, it might be called blonde chocolate. But basically, it's chocolate that tastes like caramel. But actually quite good, quite expensive. But another product is out there that they've created. The next one is ruby chocolate. Anybody familiar with ruby chocolate? No? Okay, ruby chocolate is what some are classifying as the 4th chocolate. White, milk, dark, and now ruby. Calabo are the inventors of this chocolate. And not to be confused with other chocolates that are like flavored. Like you can find white chocolates that have been enhanced with certain flavors, raspberries and whatever it is. This chocolate is actually chocolate, where it's more like a milk chocolate than a white chocolate, because in the ruby chocolate, you have a ruby bean. And that bean is actually roasted just like in milk chocolate, where in white chocolate, you only have the cocoa butter. So you think it would be more like a flavored white chocolate, but in reality, the process is like a milk chocolate, okay? And everyone I just talked about, that's what's in your little sample bag, yeah? But before you eat those, once they make this chocolate, right, then they have these people that like to, other than not just the consumer, but other testers and tasters and all that stuff, and they have like this little chart that they could use to kind of identify, you know, the characteristics of that special chocolate. And the 3 main ones are the aroma, the taste, and the mouthfeel. And then you expand on that outside the wheel. It's kind of like a color wheel. You know, you got your primary colors and then your secondary colors. It's kind of like that. So the question is, does it smell like vanilla? Does it smell like alcohol? Does it smell fruity? The mouthfeel, is it creamy? Is it chewy? You know, all these little characteristics that they try to identify. And then they can kind of explain what's so special about that chocolate. So with the ruby chocolate, they say it's kind of a fruity and acidic type of chocolate. So now that I've just told you everything you need to know to be an expert chocolate taster, feel free to go ahead and eat your little chocolate beans or taste 1 or 2 of them, and then feel free to share with me what you think of. Most of you nobody raised their hand about ruby chocolate. Feel free to try that one and is this one mine? Oh. Yeah, sour and fruity. A little bit sour and fruity for the ruby chocolate. Yep. None of it. None of it. I'm just getting ready to start my process. He was asking me how much of that process that I do, the grinding, the conching, and all that stuff. Absolutely none of it. That's the chocolate maker. Okay? Now, we have reached the chocolate, right? And we have identified it. Melt in your pocket. It's supposed to melt in your mouth, not in your hands.
About the ruby chocolate, does it have milk powder in it? Does
Ruby, yes.
Ruby has milk in it? So if it has,
I believe it, yeah.
yeah,
Ruby
so it
chocolate,
has milk.
I believe it does. I would have to confirm that, to be honest with you,
Okay.
though. Actually, I don't make anything yet with the ruby chocolate. I'm just kind of practicing with it right now to kind of pair it with something. And I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do with it. Calabo contacted me and said, we want to promote the ruby chocolate. They want to give me some free products and stuff. So I'm kind of waiting for that to see what they give me and see how I can use it.
What's Willy Wonka's favorite chocolate? You know Willy Wonka?
I do.
Well, what kind of chocolate does he have?
I don't know. I only remember the gobstopper and the golden ticket. That's the only thing I know from Wonka other than the new Wonka movie's out. But that was Willy Wonka and not the chocolate factory that's here. Okay. In there? Yeah, you had 5. Thank you. Let me explain. You had 5 pieces of chocolate in there. You had, and these are all Belgium chocolates from Calabo. Belgium chocolates. Belgian chocolates. You had the white, which they call W2. You had the milk chocolate, which is about 33, 34%, something like that. The dark chocolate, which is 57% dark. And then the caramel chocolate, and then the ruby chocolate. You like those? Yeah, I mean, chocolate is like, you've got so many different manufacturers. If you don't know it, Calabo from Belgium, they also, I believe, acquired Cacao Berry. Cacao Berry is from France. So I think they're actually one company, but I'm not sure who controls who, but I think Calabo is the big one, and then they eventually merged. So Cacao Berry and France, and Calabo are together. And then, of course, you got all kinds of other big manufacturers out there, too. But to be honest with you, here in Thailand, Calabo is one of the easiest to access. It's fairly reasonable, compared to some of the other products that would be a lot more expensive and harder to get. So that's one of the reasons why, besides liking Calabo chocolate, is the availability of it and the price to where we can make products and keep them at a reasonable price for a fine chocolate. Okay. The flavor of it? All of them. And I'll mention that at the end too when we go through there. He was asking about, what contributes to the defining flavor, whether it's where it's grown, the roasting, and all that stuff. And you'll understand when I tell you at the very end what the secret to a fine chocolate is. If that might answer your question. Okay, so now that we've talked about all that stuff that I don't do nothing with, I just go to the store and I buy a bag of chocolate, right? Okay, so that's where I come in. Okay, now we're moved on to the chocolatier. Okay, think of the chocolatier as an artist, okay, where chocolate is my canvas and all the other ingredients available to me is my paint. And hopefully, I can put those things together and come up with the Mona Lisa of chocolates. That's what we do as chocolatiers, okay? So how do we come up with those masterpieces other than a regular chocolate bar? You see, chocolate makers, a lot of them, they have to sell their chocolate and they sell it in large blocks and they sell chocolate bars, but you don't see them too much making fine chocolates. Whereas the chocolatier does the opposite, doesn't really make a whole lot of chocolate bars, but he makes little bonbons, pralines with special fillings, okay? And 5 of the most common fillings, at least in my shop anyway, that you're gonna find are these up here. Beginning with a ganache. Does everybody know what a ganache is? Nope? Okay, good, because I want to tell you what it is anyway. Okay, basically, a ganache is when you just take chocolate and you mix it with a liquid. Probably 99% of that time is going to be whipping cream, heavy cream, 35% milk fat. But it doesn't have to be. It can be water. It can be fruit juice. But the key you have to remember is that if you add a little bit of water to chocolate, it's going to seize. Chocolate and water don't go together. So you have to add enough to make it a creamy emulsion. And this is where some of the science starts to come in. When we talk about ganaches, we're talking about emulsions, a fat and water emulsion, okay? The problem is if you have too much fat or too much water, you will not get that nice little creamy filling inside, okay? It's gonna be disastrous, okay? So when we talk about ganaches, we're talking about a balanced recipe. Because usually, when you make a ganache, if you make a ganache with cream and chocolate and put it inside a filling, it might last a week. So, we have to put other things in there because we want it to last a little bit longer. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the ganache itself is like a science because we have to balance that fat and the water content and the sugar content and the dry solid content to come up with that nice creamy mixture that we know as a ganache, okay? The other thing is gianduja. Okay, gianduja is basically just taking milk chocolate and mixing it with a nut paste. That nut paste most often is either hazelnut paste, almonds, or pistachios. Those are probably the most common. And one of the reasons for that is because they have a good amount of fat in them and not too much compared to some others. If you have a lot of fat in your filling, it's possible that it can migrate through the shell of the chocolate. So you have to do things to mitigate that, and we'll talk about some of those things in a minute too. But basically, chocolate and a nut paste, you have a gianduja. Fancy word. Then we have praline. Basically, praline is just a nut paste mixed with caramelized sugar, okay? And then they just take that praline and mix it with chocolate, and then basically you have a praline gianduja. Okay, it just gives you a little bit more flavor of that caramelized sugar that's in the praline. Not to be confused with like the praline that people call like the little chocolates. So, like I said, in the chocolate world, you'll find that depending on where you come from in the world, we call one thing and another place calls it another. And sometimes it's a little confusing. But basically, that's all praline is. And then caramels. Everybody loves a good caramel, right? You know, caramels can be salted caramel, chocolate caramels, fruit caramels, whatever you can successfully mix with the caramel. All right? If any of you have ever tried at home to make caramel, or are going to try soon, there's 2 things you need to really know about caramel. Even though there's different ways to make it, wet method and the dry method. there's two main temperatures you need to be concerned about. And that is when you caramelize the sugar, that delivers or develops the caramel flavor. Too much, and it's going to be a bitter caramel, okay? And if you're not watching your caramel, it can go from a beautiful blonde color to a burnt black in about 3 seconds. So you got to be very careful when you're caramelizing sugar. All right, a lot of people don't make their own caramels. We do. I think it's kind of fun. But once you caramelize it and you get that flavor that you developed, that's when we usually we have a mixture of like glucose, butter, and heavy cream, a little bit of salt. If it's a salted caramel, a lot of salt. And then we pour that in after we developed that color that we want and the flavor. And now that all that stuff is in there, then we cook to another temperature. And that temperature tells us how firm the caramel is going to be when it's at room temperature. So whether you want to make like a caramel syrup, or you want to make a salted caramel, whatever it is, it's the different temperatures that basically what you're doing is you're eliminating water. So it becomes more solid. But it's kind of tricky, because if you have one recipe and it tells you to put this much butter and this much cream and tells you to cook to 110 degrees, say, and you say, oh, I love that caramel recipe, but I want it to be more firmer, so I'm going to cook it to 118. Well, when you cook it to 118, what you did is you just got rid of all the water, and now you have a fat mess in your caramel because the emulsion process can't take place because there's too much fat and no water. Remember, an emulsion, also in caramel, kind of like an emulsion, balance between fat and water, okay? Last one is fondants. Everybody knows what a peppermint patty is? Peppermint patty in the U.S. Here, some people call them after eights, depending on where you come from. It's basically just a little creamy thing. At least peppermint patty, York peppermint patty, that just tastes like peppermint. And a lot of people eat them after dinner because it helps with digestion. And also all the other cream fillings. One man back there, who is he at? He said he liked the dark chocolate, but he liked cream fillings. Not so big on the nuts. That's what we do. We make fondant, right? Now, you might be familiar with like cake fondant, right? Cake fondant, you know, comes like in a roll. You can roll it on there. That's totally different, okay? But when we make fondant, that's another part of the science that intrigued me, right? So, how do we make fondant? 3 ingredients: sugar, glucose, and water. That's all it is. But how does it work? So what we do is we melt all those ingredients to a certain temperature to make sure all the sugars are dissolved. And that final temperature that you cook it to also determines the firmness of that fondant, right? But the theory behind making a fondant, because it has to be very smooth on your mouth, right? Just like chocolate. You don't want it to taste like sandpaper, right? So this is what happens when you make fondant. You're melting everything in the pot, 3 ingredients. And the key behind this is that if you were to take water, 1 kilo of water, and put it on the table, it will suck up about 80% of its weight in sugar successfully. Anything more, then you're going to have excess crystals, right? Well, when we heat water, it can dissolve more crystals. So instead of just 80%, now you can go to like 120% or whatever it is, depending on how much you put in it. So what happens is, when we heat that solution up and it melts away all those crystals, Now we have like a syrupy solution, right? When we let that solution cool and the temperature cools down, it can still only hold 80%, right? So now you have excess crystals in your solution. We call that a supersaturated solution. And what that means is that there's too many crystals in there for the water to hold. So what we do is we stir it at a certain temperature. If you stir too early, the crystals form too soon and get too big. And then you have a grainy filling. You wait to the right temperature, you stir it, and slowly, it will turn into almost like a rocky mass. As if you stir it at the right time, it'll be nice and smooth. A lot of people take fondant, and they make it, and it's a solid. Anybody ever watch Hercules Candies on YouTube? They show their whole process. They're from Syracuse, New York. But they do a lot of starch. They make this fondant, and they heat it up, and then they use a funnel and just pour it into starch molds. And then they let it harden, shake off the starch, and then they dipping it. But we do it a little bit different. You have to remember, every filling that we make, I put in molded bonbons. I have a polycarbonate tray that I make a shell, and then I put the filling inside. Or fillings. Most cases, more than one. But the key to that is not only you come up with the filling, it's also the workability. Okay? When you put that filling into that little shell, you need that filling to lay flat. If it stays peaked up like this, you're going to have a bad day. So it's a balance, again, of workability, flavor, and being able to actually work with the ingredient to where it's economical. So that's just another little challenge that we face, especially with dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is hard to get a good ganache that flows nice and smooth. You can get them close, but I've never seen one yet that gets really flat like caramel and all the other stuff that we work with. Okay? So that's the fillings. The most common ones anyway. So, okay. How many minutes? Okay. Damn, time flies. Okay. Time goes pretty quick, I guess. All right, I'm going to fly through these real quick just to give you an idea of what I do, right? And I'm going to talk fast. Shelf life. The most important thing in shelf life is moisture content. Okay? If you have water in your filling, it's a home for microorganisms to grow. And you have sugar in your fillings and all that stuff. So we have to mitigate that problem because we're not a bakery. We don't make chocolates and we sell it 1 or 2 days. And then if it's no good, we throw it in the bin, right? So we have to extend shelf life. And it's all about the moisture content. And we have a little machine that we check the fillings, and then that reading will tell you, is it going to last 3 weeks, 6 months, or whatever. Okay? Kind of. That's not the only thing, but that's the most important thing, moisture content. Okay. How do we extend the shelf life? We use different sugars. We have glucose. We have invert sugar. We have sorbitol, glycerol. All these things are just sugars, okay? And I'm telling you this because if you see them on a label, they're only sugars. But they all have different properties that will help you extend your shelf life. If you see up there, you'll see that the sweetness of sugar is basically 100. Everything is based on that. If you look at glucose, 60 DEE, the sweetness is 65. That means it's only 65% as sweet as sugar. But it has different properties. It's very hygroscopic, which means it binds water. When you make a filling, you have free water and bound water, okay? Free water is for those microorganisms. We got to eliminate it. How do we do it? All these sugars. The tempering curve. This is the biggest thing that people have problem with. You buy a bag of chocolate, it tells you to heat your chocolate up to 45, come down to 27, go back up to 29. Why do I do that? I don't know, I have no idea. The bag told me to do it, right? And then you don't pay attention to the details, and then you end up with a disastrous result. Why is that? Because cocoa butter, that 55% of that cocoa bean is what we call a polymorphic fat, okay? What does polymorphic mean? It means that once that cocoa butter is melted and it starts to re-solidify, it can develop into 6 different types of crystals. The problem is we only want one crystal, beta crystal number 5, okay? So how do we manage that? Basically what we do is we manipulate the temperatures, right? And the way the process works is you heat the chocolate up to 45 degrees, you melt it down or cool it down to 27 degrees, and you'll see that those temperatures up there, the melting point, that's when the crystals begin to start. Okay? So we take it down to 27, form 5 crystal and form 4 crystal develops. But we don't want form 4. So what do? We heat it back up to get rid of the 4, but keep the 5. And all we have is the form 5 crystal, and that's what makes that snap, crackle, and pop on your candy bar. Okay, there's many different ways to temper, but they all do the same thing. And just to make a quick version of this, you might see one way, the old way they used to do on the marble table, right? That's old style. New style is putting silk. And basically what this is an incubator. And it takes cocoa butter, keeps it at 33.5 degrees or whatever you set it at, and it gives you pure beta 5 crystals. I take that from the incubator, I take 1%, put it in the chocolate, stir it around, it's tempered. No up and down and up and down. 1% tempered. That's the new way. Nothing on the table, nothing seating. So that's basically what I use. But there's many different ways. I'm sorry I gotta run through it really quick. But all right, so real quick, what's the difference between real chocolate and fake chocolate? One ingredient, cocoa butter. Fake chocolate or coating chocolate, whatever, does not contain cocoa butter. Couverture chocolate contains about 35% cocoa butter. Okay? That's the big difference. You don't have to temper compound chocolate. No tempering. You want to dip strawberries, dip them in there, it'll harden up. But it don't have the quality of the mouthfeel of a real chocolate. So the only difference really is cocoa butter and the price. Cocoa butter is expensive. All right, the second one is, what's it mean when I buy a candy bar? 92% cacao. Remember I told you that cacao bean had non-fat solids and cocoa beans, right? That 92% is telling you how much both of those are in there. So what I'm trying to say is, if you buy a 75% bar from him, and you buy one from him, it might not be the same. He might have 50% cocoa butter and 25% cocoa mass. He might have the opposite, but they're both being able to label the same way because it contains the cocoa mass and the cocoa butter. Okay, now to the question that he was mentioning over here earlier. So what are the secrets of superb chocolates? Yeah, the chocolatier. But in reality, there is no one secret. As he was asking over here, is it the roasting process? Is it the making of this, or where it's grown? Where it's grown. There's not just one thing that makes a good chocolate. It's a process of all those, between what the chocolate maker does, the manufacturer, and the chocolatier, how he pairs that with fillings, and then you come out with a fine chocolate. All right, so it's a combination of everything. And I'm sorry I had to rush through the part that I like talking about the most, crystallization and the tempering of chocolate. Time flies. I thought I was going to have to stretch it out a little bit. But basically, yeah, that's about it. I really appreciate it.
What do you think? We'll leave the questions combined for the two talks at the end. What do you think? All right. I've been given the word from George. Who's got questions about chocolate? Who was amazed at how much science and precision goes into making chocolate? I was staggered, right? It's like watching a National Geographic episode. It's amazing.
Can you buy ruby chocolates in supermarkets, or have to go in a specialized store?
Actually, you can buy it. Most of the bake shops have it, like Friendship Market down here on Patio, and a lot of the bake shops have it. Yeah, it's roughly 1,400, 1,500 baht for a 2.5 kilo, and it comes in little callets. No, it's not.
I've got a question here quickly.
Yeah, I can buy milk chocolate candy bars, but it's very difficult to get the same ones in dark chocolate, like a Milky Way. We have plenty of Milky Way, but no Milky Way dark chocolates in Boston, Massachusetts. And the same with Mounds and peppermint patties and all that. Why is that I can't?
I think it's because kids like milk chocolate, right? I noticed that Kit Kat, which is a very popular chocolate thingy in Australia, they now bring out a dark milk chocolate.
If you go to the airport, some of the different airports like Japan and stuff like that, they got like 20 different flavors of Kit Kats now, that little things. But to answer your question, probably all marketing, and they sell you a milk chocolate Milky Way, but then they sell you a dark chocolate Mounds.
Yes, being the cocoa plant is a tropical plant, is it grown in Thailand also now, or if not, why?
It is grown in Thailand. Most of the cocoa plants are grown in between the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer near the equator, right? But that's not the only place. You got Ecuador. 70% of cocoa plants are grown in South Africa. But you got Peru, Venezuela, whatever. And actually, I think some of the biggest ones are up in Chiang Mai. Take a picture. So yeah, they grow them in Thailand. And actually, up in Chiang Mai they have some. I haven't been there, but the one guy that runs the one cocoa farm, I think he's developing like his own breed of cocoa or something I've read. So yeah, they are in Thailand.
Quickly, I heard a couple of years ago I started to panic. They were talking about a world cocoa shortage. Is that still an issue?
I don't know if it's a shortage, but like I mentioned earlier about all the plantations, right? Is that they're all just like little farms, and then they collect all their beans, and they go sell them to one little place, and then they sell them to the distributor and all that stuff. So I don't know if that's why the manufacturers are working with them to try to make them more sustainable. But I do know that about 2 weeks ago, cocoa was at its highest price ever. So it could be a shortage too. There hasn't been a shortage yet from Calibo, where I come from, although they did have an issue a while back with something being contaminated or something in their process or something, and they shut down their operations in a certain place or something. So it maybe affected some areas, but as far as the cocoa bean itself, I'm not really sure about now as far as the shortage, but you can bet that Calibo and all the other factories are working with them to solve that problem.
After all, since your original problem, did you ever solve that, of creating your own Reese's cup?
Yes, I did. Actually, if you look on YouTube, you'll be amazed by what you find. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I am a self-taught chocolatier. I have no formal training whatsoever. So everything I've learned, I've either talked to other chocolatiers, read from the internet, took a few online courses here and there, but most of my real learning comes from stuff that I've ended up throwing in the trash. And then once you learn the process of something and why you do something, it makes everything more comprehensible. And then you understand what you're doing, and then it's just like, okay, now I see what's going on. So that has a lot to do with tempering chocolate, because there's so many different ways, but the process is basically the same.
You know when you buy chocolate that's too old, and it sort of develops a white deposit on it or what? What's up with that? What is the white stuff?
There's two things that happen to chocolate. You have sugar bloom and you have fat bloom. Okay? What happens is when they put that chocolate into a wrapper and everything, right? You have tempered candy bar. Okay? Snap, crackle, pop, shiny, all that good stuff, right? But then you put it in your pocket. And then that top layer exceeds the temperature for the chocolate crystals, and they start to melt, and the sugar separates, or the fat separates. If you touch the top of it like a little white grainy color and touch it and it's gritty, that's what they call sugar bloom. If it wipes off really easy and smooth, it's fat bloom. It's just things have separated because the chocolate bar has went out of temper or wasn't tempered properly. But the good news is that you really don't taste the difference. So if you got a candy bar that's been in your car, then you put it in your refrigerator, and then you take it out and you see it's all gray, most of the time it's not going to taste much different. It just doesn't look appealing. But those are the two main things that you have problems with.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for... Wait, come back. We have a very small token of our appreciation for your amazing education about chocolate, so thank you. I can tell this lady here is a real chocolate lover. She's beaming, right? And you're going to be hanging around until we...
We've got some samples available. I've got some stuff to sell if you'd like to check something out. But most importantly, if you have any other questions, I went through some of that important stuff really, really quick. I apologize.